There are rare moments in global politics when the world doesn't quietly shift, it erupts. A moment when alliances tilt, when old assumptions collapse, and when a country people had underestimated for decades suddenly steps forward with the confidence of a rising power. Today's moment wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't disguised behind diplomatic smiles. It was loud, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. The United Arab Emirates, one of the richest economies on Earth, a major geopolitical force, a global investor with reach from Asia to Africa to Europe, didn't just open its doors to Canada. It opened its vaults. It opened its trust. It opened its long-term strategic future. And at the center of this seismic shift stood one name, Mark Carney. This wasn't courtesy. This wasn't ceremony. This wasn't a photo op. This was the UAE making a deliberate, calculated billion-dollar bet on Canada's rise and on Carney's leadership. As you watch this breakdown on Northern Pulse, remember one thing. Global power doesn't shift because of speeches. It shifts because of decisions. And today, the UAE made a decision that signals the arrival of a new power bloc, one where America isn't at the center anymore. There are days when history changes in the background. Days when policymakers read dense briefing notes, analysts detect subtle patterns, and the rest of the world goes on as normal, unaware of the quiet realignment shaping their future. But this was not one of those days. This was a global spotlight moment, a moment when cameras, headlines, and world leaders all locked onto a single message. The UAE publicly chose Carney's Canada over Trump's America. The world didn't need experts to decode it. It was written plainly in every announcement, every handshake, every headline that crossed the Gulf, Europe, Asia, and North America. A country known for calculated diplomacy didn't hint, didn't imply, didn't whisper. It declared. The UAE, a nation whose sovereign wealth shapes global markets, put its strategic future in the hands of a leader who's been in office for only months, yet already acts like he's been architecting a global realignment for a decade. The message wasn't subtle. Canada is stepping into a leadership role it has avoided for generations, and the UAE is the first to stand beside it. But this wasn't just about Carney getting applause in Abu Dhabi. It was about something deeper, a recognition that Canada, under the right leadership, is capable of reshaping its global identity, its alliances, and its economic destiny. But to understand the magnitude of this shift, you need to understand exactly who the UAE is. Most people underestimate the UAE because of its size. They shouldn't. The UAE is one of the most influential economic engines on the planet. It's not just oil money. That outdated term no longer captures the reality. Today, the UAE stands at the intersection of energy, AI, finance, trade, logistics, and global diplomacy. Its leaders don't think in election cycles. They think in generations. This is a country where decisions ripple across continents. AI leadership. The UAE has the highest AI adoption rate in the world. While others debate the future of machine intelligence, the UAE is building it, embedding it into ports, finance, public services, and infrastructure. It's not a follower, it's a pioneer. Energy transformation. Yes, it's a traditional energy powerhouse, but it's also building some of the world's biggest renewable energy projects. Solar grids, hydrogen corridors, carbon-neutral logistics hubs. No country transitions faster than the UAE when it decides to pivot. Global investment reach. Its sovereign wealth funds are among the world's most aggressive long-term investors. When they commit capital, the world pays attention. When they shift direction, markets notice. So when the UAE chooses a partner, it isn't because of speeches, promises, or ideology. It's because of trust, stability, and vision. That's why this moment stunned analysts worldwide. The UAE didn't turn to Washington, even though Trump wants global attention. It didn't turn to Europe, despite their long historical ties. It didn't turn to Asia, even though Asia represents most of the world's growth. It turned to Canada and to Mark Carney. And then came the number that made the world stop and stare. Most world leaders spend years negotiating for a few $1 billion in foreign investment. They often return home with memorandums, pilot projects, frameworks, or simply a shared photograph. But Carney returned with something no Canadian leader, not in the past 40 years, managed to secure. A $70 billion commitment from the UAE. $70 billion. This isn't a press release number. It's an economic strategy number. It's long-term capital, the kind countries use to reshape their infrastructure, strengthen national resilience, and unlock new industries. And what is it going into? Canadian ports, critical mineral extraction, renewable energy projects, AI development, national infrastructure, logistics modernization, future-proof technology networks. This wasn't charity. This wasn't courtesy. This was geopolitical anchoring. The UAE locking itself into decades of partnership with Canada. It was also a message to every other nation. Canada is no longer waiting for global relevance. It's claiming it. The UAE could have invested in Europe, Asia, or the US, but they didn't. They invested in Carney's Canada. And that wasn't even the biggest achievement of the trip. Because the real shock wasn't the money, it was the deals Carney managed to sign. Deals no Canadian leader before him could get done. When Carney touched down in the UAE, analysts expected dialogue, maybe some cooperation announcements. What they didn't expect was Carney achieving in days what had been stalled for decades. First, he signed the FIPA, the Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, something past governments couldn't finalize. It ensures that investments between both nations are legally protected and stable. This is critical, because no nation invests tens of billions without a solid legal framework backing it. Then came the bigger surprise. Carney and UAE leadership jointly announced the launch of a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, a trade pact that goes beyond tariffs and includes digital trade, clean energy cooperation, AI standards, and more. And the pace? One of the fastest timelines ever attempted for a modern trade agreement. This wasn't accidental. It was a reflection of mutual urgency. The UAE wants long-term stability, minerals, ports, logistics access, and AI pipelines. Canada wants investment, global leverage, diversified partners, and new strategic alliances. Both sides saw a chance to lock arms and move fast. And it worked. But Carney wasn't only signing deals. He was doing something far more strategic. He was building a shield for Canada. A shield designed for a world where the United States under Donald Trump becomes unpredictable. Here's the truth Carney won't say out loud, but his actions reveal. He isn't reacting to Trump. He isn't waiting on Trump. He isn't negotiating around Trump. He's building past Trump. Under the surface, Carney has reoriented Canada's foreign policy around one principle. Canada must never again be dependent on the economic mood swings of a U.S. president. So Carney designed a plan with two massive pillars. 1. Attract $1 trillion in investment into Canada. This isn't small. This is transformational. Ports, housing, energy grids, highways, technology networks, all rebuilt for a globalized future. 2. Double Canada's non-US exports, meaning Canada will gradually shift its economic weight away from the US and toward partners like the UAE, Japan, India, the EU, South Korea, and Africa. This isn't diversification. This is realignment. A deliberate rebalancing of Canada's identity, away from America's shadow, toward a new multi-allied world. And the UAE became the first anchor of that new world. But what happened behind closed doors made the shift undeniable. While cameras captured speeches and handshakes, the real story unfolded in private rooms. the kind of quiet, confidential meetings where nations shape their next decade. Carney and UAE leadership met repeatedly behind closed doors, not for ceremonies, not for optics, for strategy. And these weren't small agenda items. They focused on AI-driven industrial transformation, critical mineral security, renewable energy cross-investment, building a Canada Gulf investment corridor, port modernization linked to Gulf trade routes, north-south shipping lanes bypassing traditional choke points, coordinated clean energy infrastructure, long-term capital flows into Canadian development. Every one of these issues points to a deeper truth. Canada and the UAE are building a parallel economic system without U.S. involvement. For decades, Canada couldn't move internationally without Washington's shadow looming behind it. But this time, the United States wasn't consulted, wasn't invited, wasn't even referenced. Trump had no seat at the table, and the UAE didn't need permission. For the first time, Canada negotiated as an independent economic force, not as America's northern partner. And then came the most symbolic part of all. The UAE didn't just invest in Canada. It quietly stepped into something much bigger. What emerged from these meetings wasn't a simple partnership or even a trade alliance. It was the opening chapter of a new economic bloc, one that places Canada at the center while leaving the United States observing from the outside. And that shift is what stunned analysts around the world. For decades, American policymakers assumed that any major Canadian international negotiation would naturally involve Washington's supervision. The old rulebook claimed Canada couldn't form deep strategic ties without first checking how it might affect U.S. interests. But this time, there was no phone call to Washington, no consultation, no shared stage. The UAE and Canada sat down as equals, drafted their vision, and built a foundation for decades of cooperation, entirely on their own terms. This power block isn't ideological, it's practical. It's built on stability, minerals, long-term capital, renewable energy, and the AI revolution. The UAE brings vast investment capacity and global reach. Canada brings resources, reliability, and a leader who doesn't panic under international pressure. Together, they form a partnership that doesn't need American approval to shape the future. What makes this moment even more striking is how the U.S. ended up on the perimeter. Not because Canada rejected them, but because they weren't required. The UAE wasn't looking for chaos, trade threats, or unpredictable politics. They wanted a steady, long-term partner with a clear plan. Carney delivered that plan, and the UAE responded with billions. This is what a post-American alliance looks like. Countries choosing partners based on strategy, not history. The UAE didn't choose Canada because of tradition. They chose Canada because it's finally acting like a country ready to lead. And this bloc is only just beginning. What happened in the UAE wasn't a routine diplomatic stop. It wasn't a ceremonial handshake or a polite exchange of promises. It was the signal flare marking the start of a new era. One where Canada stops waiting for permission, stops reacting to other nations' agendas, and finally moves with the confidence of a country shaping its own destiny. The UAE's decision to commit $70 billion wasn't an isolated investment. It was the first confirmation that powerful nations now see Canada not as a junior partner, but as a rising anchor in a world desperate for stability and long-term strategy. Carney didn't return home with vague intentions or symbolic gestures. He returned with a structural shift already in motion. A shift that will reshape energy grids, rebuild ports, expand trade routes, and elevate Canada into markets it has never fully tapped. This partnership lays the foundation for AI cooperation, clean energy corridors, critical mineral pathways, and technology investments that bypass traditional constraints. It's a blueprint for a Canada that is more independent, more connected, and more strategically positioned than at any point in its modern history. Most surprising of all is how naturally this transformation unfolded. Carney didn't demand global relevance. He earned it. He didn't lecture the world about Canada's potential. He proved it. And in doing so, he made one truth impossible to ignore. When Canada chooses to lead, the world pays attention. The UAE recognizes that Canada offers something rare: resources, stability, intelligence, and a leader capable of turning potential into power. And now, with the first pillar of a new global bloc in place, Canada is no longer standing at the edge of global strategy. It's stepping into the center. This isn't just a chapter in diplomacy. It's the beginning of Canada's next identity, one built on confidence, ambition, and global influence.